Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Sound Cuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to my talk. This is Designing Sound for AR Experiences. AR stands for Augmented Reality, and we're going to go through this in a second. For those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. I started my journey, well, as a musician, I started playing around the age of 3 or 4. I don't even remember when I started, but I was one of those like classically trained kids that were forced to play piano all day long. And later on, when I moved to the States around 2017, I joined Reality Hack, which is a virtual reality hackathon in MIT. And accidentally I won, and I was kind of like, okay, there's something going on with this VR technology. And back then everyone was too scared to touch it. So I decided, you know what, that's going to be my thing. From now on, I'm just going to learn everything there is to know about this technology, and maybe it will work out well. And unfortunately it did. So my winning project that ended up being my company was VRSO, Virtual Reality Symphony Orchestra, that you can see on the left corner. And unfortunately, right when I finished building that game and ready to release that, I had problems with my visa and I had to find a job besides being an entrepreneur in the States. And I joined Magic Leap. At that time, Magic Leap was just transitioning between Magic Leap 1 to Magic Leap 2, for those of you who are familiar with the company. But I got to see the production of Magic Leap 2 and got to contribute with code and with sound to all the way from the operating system all the way up to the apps that we're selling and the demos that we're showing on the Magic Leap 2. Some of them you can see here on the screen. The bottom right one is actually a project that we showed during the World Economics Forum, and that was a project to show how you can use augmented reality to help things like wildfires. And besides all of this, I also run a community on Discord called the Sonic Sphere. And this is just a community of people who are enthusiastic about AR and VR technology, sound design, understanding more interaction using sound, and designing experiences that are usually sonically driven. We have all sorts of designers there, and I'm not going to take away from AirWiggles because what they've done is incredible. But through that community, I'm able to give a little bit more of my personal touch and give some of my knowledge and information based on years of experience in the industry. The link is going to be at the end, so please stay until the end. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and honestly, the reason why I didn't have a lot of time to advertise this talk is because I got married last week. And now I want to see the entire chat full of hearts and balloons and anything you want, because yes, it was huge for me. My entire family was here. I still have luggages in my room everywhere because my family is all over the place, but that happened last week and I'm still kind of like unwinding from everything. So this is why I wasn't on top of everything. And I promised that after this talk, I'm going to go and watch all of the talks that were during this conference and catch up on everything. Our community also have been quiet for the past 2 months because I was getting married and just everything was all over the place. But now I'm back to business and all good. So, woohoo, love the comments. Love the comments. Thank you. Thank you. It was huge. All right, so we're here to talk about AR, augmented reality. So for that, I want to establish some ground terms so we all understand what we're talking about. I think it's super important, especially in a world that is changing so fast, to just kind of like establish what it is we're talking about. For those of you who have been in the industry for a while, you've probably seen something like this. So usually we use a term called XR, and XR used to stand for extended realities or expanded realities or even extreme realities. But every time we use one of those terms, a company came and just trademarked it, so we couldn't use that. So now X is just an umbrella term. And by that, I mean that X is a variable, and that variable can stand for V, M, or A, which is virtual reality, mixed reality, or augmented reality. Again, there have been attempts by companies to trademark those terms. There was headsets that were virtual reality that were called mixed reality. There were all sorts of things in the industry, but the bigger understand or the broader understanding was those three types of technologies: the virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality. Virtual reality refers to things that block your view completely. You cannot see anything, and it projects a new reality with an entire environment on the user. So you're completely detached from reality and you see something completely different. Of course, not including the ears, because as you see, it had open ears because no one cares about sound, I guess, in this industry. Mixed reality is right in between them, but let's look at augmented reality for a second. We have two types of augmented reality. One of them is immersive augmented reality, and the other one is non-immersive augmented reality. Immersive meaning inside of a headset or something that you wear on your eyes, and non-immersive is through a phone or an iPad. And right in between them, we have mixed reality that is used to refer to things that you either wear or it's on a tablet, but you can also interact with this, and the virtual content is aware of the real content, meaning it can interact with either your hands or the walls or tables or anything that is physical, that is actually in the space. Now, if you know all of those terms, I'm sorry to tell it to you, they're all old and outdated and we don't use them anymore. Why not? Because since we came up with those terms, the technology has changed drastically and pretty fast. Let's look at AR, for example. So AR started from something very simple where it just shows you content on your phone. And then over time, it had the ability to also have object recognition. So it was designed to recognize either your face or recognize the environment or have heat map or anything that has to do with object recognition or space recognition. Beyond that, we also added something else. That thing is the ability to dim the screen. So dimming the screen, the upper video that you're seeing is from the Magic Leap 2, and we're able to completely dim your world and turn it down, so you're almost transitioning into VR within an AR headset. The cheaper version of it is Nreal, that have just put a little cover on your glasses, so it turns it into a completely black screen that through that you can see virtual reality. So those are the changes that augmented reality have been through. What about VR? VR have taken the other route. So from being completely blocked and not showing you anything from the world, we move to this, which is pass-through. So we now have the ability through the VR headset that is not supposed to show you the world to actually interact with the outside world. So now you can see either like little windows that are opening or fully AR scenes that are through a VR headset. And it gets us all the way to the Apple Vision Pro that technically is a VR headset, but it was designed to show you the real world at all times. So you're not completely detached and you still see reality. You just see another layer on it that you can interact with. So what is it? Is it VR? Is it MR? Is it AR? It's somewhere in between. And this is why we now have new categories like spatial computing that may be encapsulating a little bit more of what we're trying to do rather than those outdated terms that I showed before. Now, with all of that being said, we're here to talk about sound. So let's talk a little bit about spatial audio. I'm sure that all of you have heard the term spatial audio, and we're going to define that one as well. I mean, Apple introduced it in the biggest commercials ever, so I guess it's pretty important, and I guess it's going to change our lives forever, right? Usually when I ask people what is spatial audio during talks, this is the type of answers that I'm getting. It's all over the place. It could be a sound that is in a space, it's sound that is attached to an object, the sound that is in Unity, HRTF, stereo is spatial because you have directionality. And again, those terms change constantly. And I just want us to establish the understanding of what exactly is it when we talk about spatial audio. So this is, by the way that Magic Leap describes spatial audio, and it was really hard to work with the designers to try to explain to them how to visualize what spatial audio is exactly, or why is it so important. So I hope that by the end of this talk, you guys will at least understand what we're talking about, so you can tell others what is spatial audio. So the best definition actually came from me just playing around with ChatGPT. And the definition was spatial audio is a sound technology. Let's start with that. It's a sound technology that replicates the nuance and complexity of how we hear sound in real life, creating a three-dimensional, physicalized listening experience. So for spatial audio, we need algorithms. We need some kind of a computer that does some kind of a processing, or some kind of a technology that does some processing that will mimic reality and how we listen to things in real life. So usually when I do those talks live, I would take like a speaker and I would toss it between people in the audience, and I will say, is this spatial audio? Because if you take a speaker and you just move it around, then the sound is spatial. It's coming from a physical space. But no, we're not talking about just a sound in space. We're talking about a technology that is trying to mimic reality. So for that, let's just go a little bit of the history of how we used to play sound. What type of technology did we use to mimic the way that we're hearing sound? So the first one, pretty straightforward. This is mono, and from mono we move to stereo, and from stereo we move to surround systems that have a little bit more depth to it. And surround systems can look also sometimes like this and sometimes like this, and it can get really, really complex with 5.1, 7.1, 9.1.2 point something, and all the way up to a Dolby Atmos studio that has like encapsulating, I want to say something like 64 speakers. I did get the experience of Dolby Atmos in their headquarters. They had speakers like beyond, above, like beyond the screen and under you and above you everywhere. I'm pretty sure that even like below the chairs we had speakers, but I'm not sure about this. And the idea was that now we're transitioning from the amount of speakers that we have, like 5.1 systems or 7.1 systems, to something new where we don't think about sound as this speaker or that speaker, and we think of sound as, where is it going? Where is it coming from? How does the user perceive it? So it has nothing to do with how many speakers we have and everything to do with how it's being perceived, if that makes sense. And then Unity gives us this, which is great. This is spatial audio, right? Like it has directionality, it has a clear point source, and that's it, basically. We can just go home from here. But no, there is much, much more than this. Because the sound that Unity gives us some attenuation of distance, meaning when I get further away from something, it will get quieter. And it gives me like a point source where it plays from that source. That's practically it. We're going to look in Unity in a second and see what actually they offer, but this is not spatial audio. Please do not be confused with this. So to create immersive environments, we must understand how we perceive reality. So how do we actually hear sound? Human sound localization is based on, firstly, our physical body and how we're built. So our head mass, our shoulders, our neck even, all of the angles in between are changing the way that the sound is traveling to us. The same way, in the same way, also the distance between, like if a sound coming from afar or if it's coming from the back, we're going to perceive it differently. And the reason why, it's because our ears are shaped in a certain way that allows us to understand that when a sound is coming from the back, it's kind of like filtering some of the frequencies. And actually, many times when we're hearing a sound from the back and we're not really sure if it's from the back or not, we would do something very quickly with our head. Most of you won't even notice it, but we do this. So it's actually tuning your head left and right a couple of times until you move back, and then you can notice if the sound is coming from behind you. Of course, the shape of our ear is also going to change the way that we're hearing sound. So the way the sound travel is going to change based on the shape of our ear. That means that each one of us have a unique experience with sound. And there are even animals that have learned over the years to turn their ears around so they can hear the sound spatially. This is, by the way, the cutest slide that you're going to see here. So don't expect anything else beyond this. I'm seeing something in the comments. I'm just going to read it for a second for anyone in the Orange County. What is this? Immersive Media 2-year certificate program. Oh, that's really cool. They're extra to their sound design and Pro Tools class and 101 certification. I actually did that certification and I didn't know that exists. That is such a cool resource. Thank you so much, Scott. The other thing that is important about spatial audio and the way that we perceive sound is how many times does it reflect in the room. Every time the sound reflects on either a floor or a surface or any type of material, the sound is going to change how it travels to us. So the more we have those reflections, the easier it is for us to understand where the sound is coming from. And in the same way, we also need to know when there are walls and what's going to happen when that wall appears. So some walls are going to completely dim the sound. Some of them are going to let some of the sound through. And all of those obstructions are going to change the way that we are hearing sound. I hope that makes sense. If there are any questions, I'm going to pause for a second just to see if there are any questions, because we're going to move to more things in a second. Looks like we're all good. Cat spotted. That's true. So in order to capture the way that we're hearing sound, we developed a technology called binaural microphones. And those microphones are actually pretty old. This technology, I think, was invented around the 70s, something like that. And binaural microphones actually mimic the way our ear looks like and shaped, and are designed to give us the experience as if we're listening to the sound in a room. So they look something like this. So the ears are made out of silicone. There is a body, there is a torso, there are shoulders. It's placed in an actual room. So the experience of listening to it is as close as we can get it to sounding like you're actually like in the room listening to something. The most famous recording, by the way, with binaural microphones is this guy. If anyone knows who this is, I'm just going to give the chat 2 seconds to respond. Anyone knows who this one is? That's Tom York. He recorded one of his albums using a little dummy head on a stick, and I don't know if the hat is used for acoustic purposes. I want to assume that it is, just because it's way cooler to think that he put this hat for acoustic purposes, but maybe not. Maybe it's just for fun. But the interesting thing is that the critics of that album said that it really sounds like you're standing next to him when he was recording that album. That's how real this experience was. If you ever heard of the barber shop experience of the 3D sound, or there are a lot of others on YouTube, this is how they were recorded using those binaural microphones. So the microphone is seated exactly inside of the ear, and that way it's recording it as if a person is there. Nowadays, we have different versions of it. So some of them look like this, which is a little bit smaller, and some of them look like that, which is just a little microphone that sits in your personal ear and lets you record through your own skull and the shape of your ear. So those are the options if you want to look them up and buy them. We have one in our studio actually at Magic Leap, and it's really cool to use this. Once in a while, we would like just let people try this, and it's really, really fun. Now, okay. Sorry, we have this video. I'm going to send that video later just because we only have mono sound here. But if you want to look that up, this is like New York City in 3D sound. So I'm pretty sure that any video that you watch with 3D sound is going to have this like binaural encoding in it. This is just one experience that I chose. So from 3D sound to 360, 3D is going to give us depth, is going to show us where the sound is going to sound to us where the sound is coming from. It's not going to show anything. That's 3D. How do we take it from 3D, from something with depth, to 360 sound? 360 sound meaning that it's all around you, and when you move your head, you know where the sound is coming from. So if we go with kind of the same logic that cameras went with, so if you have like a 3D image, that's two cameras that have the parallax between them, so you can actually record a photo with depth. If we add a lot of them together and put them in a circle, then we can get like a 360 thing, right? Like that's going to work. So if we look at omni-binaural microphones, those are binaural microphones just in 360. So if cameras look like this, maybe a microphone can look like this? Question mark. And I'm sorry about this one. This is going to be the grossest photo that you see in my slideshow. It might even look like this. I know, it's gross. We don't want to look at it. It's, who would even, what were they? I don't know what they were thinking. Okay, let's move on from this one. This did not work, and those were very expensive and honestly very gross. So we moved to ambisonic microphones. And ambisonic microphones, they can look like this or like this, and sometimes even like this. So what we're seeing here, one of the microphones, the one on the left, is first order ambisonic. The one on the right is second order ambisonic, and the one in between is the Zelia microphone that is advertised to have 19 cores inside of it and can actually differentiate between different musicians in the room. And if we look at different microphone polarities, I'm pretty sure that this crowd knows about microphone polarities and what does that mean, but we have just 3 examples for different polarities here. So one of them is like omnidirectional, one of them is a shotgun mic, and one of them is a concert mic. And we know that polarities can change based on the use of the microphone and based on what we want to record. So for ambisonic microphones, the way that they're set up, if we look at a regular microphone, the one that we care about is the bidirectional microphone. From the bidirectional microphone, if we take that cord that can record from 2 sides in the same time, just like the 2 singers were singing from 2 different sides, if we take the bidirectional that can record 2 sides and we just combine a lot of them together, we get something like this, which creates a lot of interesting shapes in it, and that can record sound very interestingly. And the way it's perceived is something like this. So this is first order ambisonic when we only have 2 cores, like 4 cores, 2 microphones. So like 2 on the sides and 2 up. And then we go up to third order ambisonic, fourth order ambisonic, and so on. And you see that the more cores we have, the easier it is to differentiate where exactly the sound is actually coming from. So you can still differentiate with first order ambisonic, but look how much simpler it is to know where the sound is coming from when you have more cores. I'm just going to let that one run again so you can see that, and I'm going to take the moment to look at the chat to see if you have any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing. You had one in your profile pic. I did. I actually have a little microphone in my profile pic. That is true. Oh my God, we have polar pattern t-shirts. I did not know that. I'm gonna order mine like right after this talk, probably. Thank you, Lewis. This is great. Awesome. No more questions. We're just going to continue. This talk is not going to be completed without talking just a little bit about speaker array. Speaker array is when we take a lot of speakers and we put them in a sphere together. This is also super expensive technology. I see it every year in AES. Every year, someone has to put a speaker array. It's kind of like it became our joke to like see how many people are going to bring a speaker array to AES. It's usually at least 1, if not 3. And speaker arrays is just a dome, just like you see here, that has a lot of speakers around it. And usually it's using the Dolby Atmos algorithm to control where the sound is going. So you can see like on the console, like right on the left side, you can see the like little cube there and a ball that is moving inside of it. So when we're talking about speaker array, again, the movement does not move from speaker number 14 to speaker number 2. It's more move from the left corner to the bottom right corner, or move as a wave that is going up and down. So the motion is, I see it a little bit more artistic and a little bit less technical, even though it requires a lot of technical skills. But the idea of like kind of drawing with sound and actually moving it around without thinking about how it's being set is, for me, it's magical. So luckily, We don't need any of those microphones because we have something even better than all of them, which is computer algorithms. And that brings me back to our little Unity audio source. When you open Unity, it shows you this little audio source. And what it has on it is volume, a little bit of pitch, some directionality. It has this like 3D panning, which 3D panning just means that it goes from left to right ear. And like if it's on your left, it's going to be a little bit louder on your left. If it's on your right, it's going to be a little bit louder on your right. And distance attenuation, meaning when you go away from this, the volume is going to change. It also has some Doppler, but I don't recommend using it. If anyone have ever tried to use the Doppler in Unity, it's not great. But what it doesn't give you is all of this information that I mentioned beforehand. It doesn't give you directionality beyond left and right. It doesn't take into consideration the room that you're in. It barely gives you any control of how the sound is being played in the space, and it doesn't sound like you're in the space. It sounds like, I don't know, it sounds pretty simple. And we usually refer to it as 3D sound, not as spatial sound. In order to allow Unity to have spatial audio, you need a plugin. You need to add an extension to Unity, and this extension is going to be added in your project settings where it says Spatializer plugin. Many companies have developed different plugins over the years. They look sort of like this. So you have the photo on the bottom left. This is from the Magic Leap 1 days that they developed a plugin called, I think the public name is MSA. We have the upper one that is by Meta that also is showing you how the sound and the frequencies are going to change based on the reflections of the room. And the guitar in the middle is actually from Google Resonance. Google Resonance have been shut down, so the project is open source and anyone can use it, but there is no active development on it. It is very stable, and I highly recommend at least checking it out because it's pretty good plugin. I've been using it for years. Very, very stable. So before I go through more things, I'm just going to check in the chat if there are any more questions. Let's see. Okay, we have a message here with questions. Questions about walls and reflections. Are there any solutions for handling occlusion that aren't too resource heavy? I've seen some tools that constantly check listener distance from walls, but understanding it can be expensive to constantly calculate those distances and affect the sounds in real time. So it depends on the plugin that you choose to use. Some of the AR plugins that were designed for the see-through headsets were designed to actually create a space around the user and create a mesh. So based on that mesh, we can calculate the reflection. Microsoft had an entire research on how to calculate it in real time. And yes, it was very compute heavy. What I recommend is trying to kind of mimic it as close as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just like we saw with binaural recording, it's not really your ear, so it's not going to sound exactly like you, but it's close enough. So try to design a room and add obstructions to the walls based on the material of the walls is going to give you a result that is pretty close. That's going to be my advice. But as you know, probably at this point, audio is one of those things that are pretty much being neglected in the gaming world. So if you look at Unity, if you want to add a cube, that's 2 clicks and you have a cube. If you want to add color to that cube, no problem. 2 clicks and you have color to the cube. If you want to add physics to the cube, again, it's 2 clicks. If you want the cube to make a realistic sound every time it falls, you need an audio engineer that sits and writes code for like 3 days to get that cube to sound well. So there's some limitation on audio, but this is actually a good thing because that means that we're going to keep our jobs forever. Could you explain again how an ambisonic mic is better or different than binaural mic, at least the context of capturing recordings? So if you record with a binaural microphone, it gives you a 3-dimensional image of the sound. So if you play that through headphones, you're going to hear it as if you're seated in the room. But the problem is that every time you move, the room is going to move with you. So if you're recording something, let's say for Spotify, and you want really the sound as if someone is in the room with you, then binaural is probably going to be the better option. If you want to create experiences that are interactive, that require a headset, that require movement of the user, maybe it's a 360 video, maybe it's a VR application, maybe something else, then you want to capture the entire room and you want the user to be able to move and rotate, but the room will stay where it is. That means that if the guitar is here and the drums are here, when you move your head, they're going to stay wherever they are. Usually we don't really listen to music like this. We're not used to it. But for interactive experience, it works pretty well. Yeah, Unity in particular does not have anyone developing that in their engine. I know. As I said, on one hand, it's horrible. On the other hand, we have jobs. So, you know. So I want to talk a little bit. Wait, I'm going to take a sip from my tea. Wait, have you used Valve's Spatializer plugin? Actually, I have not. Should be pretty good, but I haven't had a chance to use it. I do have a list of resources in the end, and I have some resources for spatializing plugins. So if you want to look at that, that's going to appear at the end. I can also post it on AirWiggles after the talk. So I want to talk a little bit about interactions and the unique interactions that you have when you design AR experiences, because that's what you came here to listen to, right? So let's say you have a head tracking device, for example, this one, but it could be any device. I'm just using this for no particular reason. It creates an active scene in front of the user. The cool thing about sound is that sound doesn't have a field of view, but visuals does. So that means that the person who is wearing the headset is seeing an active scene in front of them, and everything else is not interesting, basically. So if you think about a film, you know how a film is transitioning and you can see different parts of a scene, but what you're hearing is only what is actively in front of you in the screen. That's going to be the same way in AR, but the problem is that now we don't have control over the camera. The user have control over the camera, and they can move their head whenever they want to. With that in mind, let's start with the easiest one. It's close to me, so it's louder. AKA distance attenuation. This is the most straightforward, basic way to implement spatial audio. So if you're familiar with working in Unity or Unreal or Godot, you know that usually they create some kind of a sphere. So anything that is really close to me is going to be the loudest. Anything a little bit outside of the sphere is going to be quieter and going to go quieter as I'm going over the edge. And everything outside of that sphere is not going to be heard at all, even though it is in the experience. Even if it's playing a song in a loop, I won't be able to hear it until I get closer to it. And every time that I add more audio sources, they're going to be added based on that attenuation. So everything close to me is going to be louder. Everything that is a little bit further is going to be a little bit quieter. And as I'm moving in the room, those sounds are going to adjust themselves and their volume based on where I am. So if I'm moving somewhere, the sounds that are closer to me are suddenly going to get louder. The sounds that are getting outside of those spheres are not going to be heard at all. This is a really basic way of understanding spatial audio. And it's a pretty good one, but there are better ways to do that. So what about if it's close to me, like we had in the beginning, but this time I'm looking at it. So this time it's not about the distance. It's about the attention that I'm giving something. So as humans, we have the ability to tune out sounds, even if they're really close to us, in order to focus on whatever it is we want to interact with. So even though some of the sounds are really far away from me, if I'm interacting with them, if I'm looking at them, maybe they should be a lot louder than the sounds that are really close to me, but right now are not important. And this is a way to create attenuation that is a little bit more nuanced for your mix. Another scenario is, what about if it's looking at me? So in this example, the one that is looking at me is going to be way louder than the one that is looking away from me. Again, this is just the way that humans perceive sound. If we have someone that is looking away from us, we're not going to be able to hear them as clearly. And this is why I emphasize that Unity does not give you enough out of the box, because it only gives you this like little sphere that makes sounds from any directions. And we need to make sure that we can attenuate the sound based on the directionality of it. So right now, even though I have those spheres around me, I'm going to hear the one that is looking at me way louder than the one that is closer to me. What about if there is an obstruction? Sometimes that obstruction is going to completely mute the sound. Sometimes it's going to just filter the sound. Sometimes it's not going to do anything at all. It really depends on the experience that you're creating. But if you have like a glass wall or a wood wall, try to consider how it would sound like with that type of an obstruction in the room. Again, even if the sound is close to you, just attenuation, just distance is not enough to create a meaningful experience. What about if it needs to grab my attention? So even if something is very far, even if I'm interacting with it, but something needs my attention right now, maybe it will get priority over the sounds that I am looking at or the sounds that are closer to me. And of course, mixing all of the aboves together in one experience can get really, really complex. Here is one example from my job. And in this one, we were trying to show what our controller is capable of doing. So it has a few different functions to it, and it has a touchpad on the middle. So the touchpad, you can either tap on it, you can swipe on it, or you can force press on it. The problem is, when you swipe on it, you also inherently touch it. And we wanted a different sound for when you touch it, to when you swipe it, to when you force press it. In order to do that, we put everything in different sides of the room. And basically, when the user is moving around, they can only hear the interaction that they're doing right now. It's still happening, but the user is not able to hear it. I hope that you can hear sound. Please let me know if not. So this is just a small example of what you can do when you really pay attention to audio. The next thing that I want to bring up is the different type of inputs that we have in those devices. So it doesn't even matter if you're using our device or any other device. You have a handheld device, usually something like a controller or a tapper or something that you can hold in your hand. You have voice input nowadays, and you have hand gestures on most of the devices. Now, a handheld device doesn't have to be a controller. It doesn't have to click on things, and it doesn't have to point at things. It could be so many different things and so many different experiences. And each one of them is going to have a different type of sound attenuation to it. So if you have a sword or you have a phone, think about where the sound source is going to be and how it's going to change if you hold, let's say, the sword really far from you or really close to you. Let's say it's a lightsaber that is supposed to make a sound every time you move it. How are you going to design something like this? Let's say it's a phone that you only hear it when you really get it close to you. So what does that mean with the sound? And what does that mean for other users who are standing nearby that might be able to hear it as well? Voice is another one of those considerations that I wanted to bring up. So voice is usually making people quieter because they don't want to interact with the voice unit. And the reason why, it's because most of us don't have the perfect Californian accent that the voiceover understands everything. So when we're trying to talk to our device, it sounds kind of laggy or not really working well. So we just avoid it at all. But in order to create trust between the machine and the user, we need to create some kind of a language that, even though it's not an actual language, like it's not words, users can understand what is being said. So for example, I created two sounds that are kind of like going up as a question and then going down, and it's the same sound, it just have a different direction to it, so the users can understand that it says, hey, Magic Leap, yeah? Can you do something? Sure. So just like a human voice is going to go up and then down. Let's hear it. Hey, Magic Leap, can you do something for me? Again. So by pairing the sound and by creating a language, I can tell the users, I know what you mean. I understood the assignment. I'm going to do what needs to be done. So please do not neglect voice. It's a huge opportunity to create a really meaningful experience. And the last one is hand gestures. Hand gestures are done without a controller, so there are no haptics. That's the vibration that comes from the controller. And also it doesn't have that much tactile because your hands are much softer compared to a plastic controller. So when you're designing sound for when the fingers are snapping together, it needs to be more significant and a little bit bigger than what you would design if you were using a controller, just because the user actually don't have a way to know if the button was being pressed or not. I've seen it a lot on Apple Vision Pro where people don't know if their pinch actually registered or not because there's no sound attached to it. So if you have a physical button, you know that you pressed it and nothing happened. If you only have hand gestures, you don't know if the computer recognized it or not. So be sure to add just a little bit of sound that will be significant so it can like take over for the place of the haptics and the physical tactile feeling that comes from a controller. Now, with all of that, here are my personal recommendations when you're designing AR experiences. First one is the environment. The environment is kind of the same as any video game that you're designing, but now you're going to add an ambisonic ambient layer above everything. And I call it the skybox layer because for visual people, it's easier to understand what a skybox is. So it's something that is steady in your scene, that when you move your head, it stays where it is. And it kind of gives you the ground to play around in. And on top of that, you can start building your ambient, your short loops, and then your one shots. Attenuation curves. We usually start with something that look like this. We call it the Nessy curve. Some people, I'm not going to name them right now, but from some companies decided to call it the brontosaurus curve. But you guys are all smart and you all can see that it looks like the Loch Ness monster, right? It looks nothing like a brontosaurus curve. So you feel free to make fun of people for calling it the brontosaurus curve. Anyway, the idea is that you start with this type of a curve and then you start adjusting it. Because what we're trying to do in AR and VR experiences is try to create this point of focus that when you look at something and you interact with it, you can hear it 100%. But the second that you move even a little bit from it, it's completely quiet. So you can't hear it because it's not in your field of view and it's just taking some of your attention. Hashtag Nessy curve. Love it. Pair your interactions together. This is something that I showed with the voiceover, but please, as much as possible, if you have open and close, if you have tap and release, if you have press and release, if you have grab and let go, try to pair them together because that's going to ease the mind of your user and they're going to feel a lot better in the experience. The best experience that I've seen so far, at least the most successful one, are one that have a very cohesive language. It doesn't matter if it's 8-bit or a full symphonic orchestra. It needs to be consistent and it needs to use the same language so users can understand this is what I'm doing and this is what interacts with what. So try to just pick some kind of a language and go with this as much as possible. I usually come up with like 2 or 3 patches on a synthesizer, and that's my instrument for that app. And everything is going to come from this one sound. I might put some reverb on it. I might put some other effects on it, but I'm going to try to use the same type of language so users can have a consistent experience. Use complex sounds. Please, you're all such good sound designers. Please do not use sine waves ever, ever. And the reason why, it's because our brains don't know how to spatialize it. Think about this. If you have just one sine wave, if it gets to your head, there's no way for it to change or like switch a phase so your brain can perceive it as a spatial sound. The more content you have, the more frequencies you have, the easier it is for our brain to perceive where the sound is coming from. So usually I go with at least 3 layers. Some sound designers go even to 5 or 6 layers. Please use as many, like, I'm not saying as many layers as possible, but at least few layers, and some of them should be a little bit longer so you have this harmonic content that can travel through distance and can explain the user where the sound is coming from. Short sounds are going to be very hard to perceive, so I usually go with this type of a scheme of like a really short one, a harmonic one, or a melodic one, whatever fits that sound at that moment, and put it right in between, because that's going to give me all the harmonic content, and then something really with a long tail so it can like drag and go throughout the distance. I actually also use reverb and delay as not as something from a distance, but just as a way to embellish the sound and add a little bit more. And those sounds, because the reverb just adds all those like little frequencies that can travel through the distance. So think about using reverb as a creative tool, not just as something to add space. And of course, resource sharing. So we have a Notion page with a lot of different resources that I use to give to either students or people that I give lectures to. So please feel free to scan it now. There's also a link there to the Sonic Sphere, which is our community on Discord. If you have any questions or you want to message me about anything, I'm going to try to be available now that I'm like after wedding craziness. And that's it. Thank you very much. Questions? I tried acoustics project by Microsoft with Unreal Engine. I couldn't make it work properly. It kind of works, but doesn't sound good in small spaces, I think. It's just me. Have you or anyone worked with it? And is it really good? And is there anything better for Unreal? Unreal has a lot more support than Unity, and it has different like attenuation like shapes. So it has a bit more support than Unity. The Microsoft one, I'm pretty sure it didn't work because it's very like compute heavy. I tried recently, but this is more for binaural experience, the Atmo key that were pretty good. So this is one option for you. But I'm gonna look for other ones for Unreal. If you're either on AirWiggles or on the Sonic Sphere, I can share some more resources. Melissa is always the sweetest. Love you. For the Nessy curve, there is a small bump just after zero distance. Is that intentional, or is that a byproduct of the Bezier curve? Let's see. This one, there is a small bump just after the zero distance. You mean right here? Usually it's because when it's like in the field of view, we do want the users to hear it a little bit. But as I said, this is just a starting point. And from that starting point, you want to start adjusting it. So usually what I would do is I'll take the closer dot and I'll just move it inwards until the interaction feels right. And please, please, please do not check things on your computer. Make a build, test it on your device, because it's going to sound completely different on those tiny speakers that those devices have. Usually the speakers for AR and VR devices are not that good, so a lot of the frequencies are going to get lost in between. Anything below 500 is usually barely even heard unless you like bring really good earphones for people. And anything above I don't even remember. I want to say anything above 10,000, you won't be able to hear at all, just because of the quality of those speakers. With Apple Vision Pro, it's a little bit better because Apple makes more effort to get us good sound. But yeah, I love your lesson about sound ambisonics and binaural. Thank you so, so much. It took me a while to figure out the difference between all of them. So I'm glad I'm able to just share that information with everyone. By the way, if you talk to other professionals that are not me in the industry, everyone have their own definition for what is spatial audio, what is binaural recording, what type of spatializer should we use. It's all over the place. So if you talk to other people, you might hear different definitions. I just wanted to show you all of the different terms that are being used in the industry. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that our industry is like transitioning into trying to understand what it is that we're building, just like the headset manufacturers are trying to understand how to call this new medium that we're creating. It's so sad hearing your sounds in VR, lol. Yeah, that's true. But honestly, for me as a sound designer, it created an interesting challenge to get a lot of content within this like very narrow frequency band. And when I would talk to mastering experts or mixing experts and I would try to get advice from them, they didn't quite know how to grasp this issue because they're used to like their large speakers or people listening to things at home, and they're not used to like a really, really narrow band. So that created an interesting challenge to solve. Thank you, Blaine. Good to see you. Have you ever thought about what it'd be like to have tree ears? Tr- Trinaural? That sounds interesting. Now I kind of want to hear this. If you ever record something as a tree, please let me know and please send me the recording. By the way, this is the last talk of the day, so Louis told me I can stay here as long as I want. So if you have any questions, that will be a good time. Or we can let Louis go to sleep. That's the other option. I'm just going to stay for a couple more minutes to see if anyone have any questions or concerns or comments or anything. And if not, we can finish it here. And thank you so much, guys, for being a great audience. Would love to hear if you have any tips of working with that narrow frequency range. Let's think. Firstly, start by listening to, like, pick a device. For me, it was the Magic Leap 2 device, but it could be a Meta Quest device or it could be any other of those headsets. And just listen to sounds with it. Record something, put it on the headset, and just take a listen to it. Something that I started doing is also doing it with apps on the phone and realizing that the mix that was created for apps on the phone is completely different than the mix that was created for a computer. So if you record even an app on your phone and play it through your fancy speakers, it's going to sound horrible. So the mix that is needed in order to get those frequencies out is completely different than the one that is needed for like the large speakers in a studio. I actually had someone that messaged me and he said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I composed a video game, but I mixed all of it on my laptop with the shitty laptop speakers. And I said, wait a second, how is the game going to be played? And he told me on a phone. And I said, well, that's actually perfect because those shitty speakers are actually going to simulate how it would sound like on a phone that has just a tiny speaker on the back. So try to mimic the technology that you're using. You don't need the fancy equipment if you're creating something for a tiny speaker this size that is going to sit right near your temple. What are the biggest difficulties or obstacles you faced recently in designing spatial audio system, and what are you planning to overcome them? Wow, that's a good question. What are the biggest difficulties? Explaining my vision if that makes sense. So sometimes we will create some kind of an experience with spatial audio and really put a lot of emphasis on the details. So when you're looking at a model, it makes sound. When you look far away, the sound is kind of like dips down, and people would just miss it and would just not know what it is. Sound, I realized it only recently in the last 2 years, I think, that sound is invisible for people. It wasn't invisible for me because I'm a musician. So for me, sound is the notes on the paper, it's the fingers that are moving on the piano or on the guitar. So for me, it was never invisible. But when you're designing applications and when you're talking to visual artists, they do not see sound. So because of that, sometimes some of the things that you do get missed. Um, as in general, talking to visual artists is a challenge because they also don't know how to comment on your work. Because I don't know, for a visual designer, you can say, I want the monster to be green and to have hair and to be this size. But for music, they never know what to say. They're like, I want it to sound, or like they try to comment and they say like, well, it doesn't sound right, but they're not really sure why it doesn't sound right. So the way I overcome it is I give them few options of different sounds, and I try to power them with words that are not musical words. Things like, here is a soft sound versus a harsh sound. Here is a long sound versus a short sound. Here is a cuddly sound or a calm sound versus an angry sound. So when I show them this contrast, they start understanding how to comment on sounds. Scott VR brought up VR AR certificate in California a bit ago. Just wondering if you can recommend any good programs on the East Coast of the US, or alternatively any online. There are so many to choose from. Wow, good question. Um, I know that Berklee College of Music designs some classes for spatial audio. I don't know if they're still going. I know that there was a teacher called John Escobar that have done few classes on how to record an ambisonic and how to spatialize it. I think that they're also online. You don't have to be a student to get them. Other than that, I honestly don't, because this field is changing so drastically that it's a matter of just finding information online. This is why I built my own community, so I can give this information to as many people as possible. I'm planning in the future to release some courses online, but please don't count me on this, because I don't know when they're going to be released. But if there is big demand, I'll get right to it. Just make sound good. True. Very relatable. I had similar experience in my ICAM program at UC San Diego. When I went to college, there was no programs for spatial audio. I didn't understand what it was. I tried to ask some people like, what is it? And everyone like pulled me into different directions. And it took me so long to figure out what it is we're even talking about or what to use this technology for. We had people that recorded a song in 360 ambisonics, and it was kind of cool. But then I realized that no one listens to music while doing this with their head. It's kind of weird. And usually people don't like listening to music that is not like right here, because we're so used to this stereo mixing. Even though binaural snippets and bits are starting to make it into mainstream media, you can hear it with, let's say, Billie Eilish songs, that she adds like a little bit of physical sound that you're supposed to hear with headphones. And now that a lot of the listening experience moved to headphones, we're hearing more binaural recordings. Ambisonics, it's really hard to find how to use it in a creative way without that being annoying or without that being a gimmick. So for me, it's always about choosing the right technology and using it as a means to an end, using it as some kind of a creative vessel to take my art to the next level. If anyone have technical questions about spatial audio, feel free to DM me. Oh, thank you so much, Blaine. This is great. MIT Media Lab might have some. That is true. Honestly, if I find some classes, I'm gonna send them over to you. But right now, nothing comes to mind because I didn't know any classes back then, and this is why I'm doing those talks. Just gonna check if I missed any question. Let's see. I think I did. Silly question, but for the okay, we did read this one. Other than this, I think this is time to wrap up my talk. Thank you guys so much for being here. Please stay in touch as much as possible, and I hope you learned something today. And I hope that makes you better sound designers in the future. And I can't wait to hear what you guys are making. Please send me any work that you have. I love hearing people's work. Right? If there are no more questions, I'm gonna close the session. Thank you guys so much. You've been great.